Chapter 3 Greeks and Jews. Aristotle was Alexander the Great's tutor. By 3031 BC, Alexander had crushed the Persians, conquered Egypt, and taken the lands of Sumer. It was as if he was sweeping away all previous kingdoms to establish his absolute preeminence. As Alexander marched across Asia, he brought Greek ideas with him. His conquering armies, you might say, tried to paint the world Greek. After Alexander's early death, the kingdoms established by his generals and their families saw themselves as part of a world of Greek ideas, Greek literature, Greek art, Greek athletic contests, Greek gods and goddesses. Even as the Romans rose to power in Italy, they understood that they needed to learn from the Greeks. Zeus, for example, was renamed Jove, but he remained the same god. Expanding the Greek world did not mean the old division of Greek and barbarian had disappeared, just the opposite. The Greeks knew that they were the best of all, the bearers of civilization. Certainly the more Greek others became, the more nearly equal they became. But that also meant that those who refused to adopt Greek ways were completely uncivilized, and there was one group that refused to join in this ever-expanding shared world, the Jews, who lived in an area of modern Israel. The Greeks were not out to enslave the Jews, but rulers who shared in the Greek world of ideas and culture dominated the land of Jews. The Greeks had no interest in Jews or Jewish books. They did not study Jewish history or laws. They were not curious about Jewish ideas or beliefs. From the Greek point of view, Jews who wanted to hold on to their traditions were just stubborn. Jews needed to study, learn, and adapt. Some Jews did just that. To be Greek meant having naked young men, their bodies glistening with oil, compete in athletic contests. To be Greek meant holding ceremonies that honored Greek gods in the holiest temple devoted to the Hebrew one God. To be Greek meant finding nothing wrong with men demanding sex from slaves or pursuing young boys. If a Jew preferred to be more lax, more modern, and mixing some Greek practices with his Judaism, soon enough Judaism itself would be just one more flavor within Greek culture, and the Jewish God would be a kind of local version of Zeus. Many Jews were ready to accept this bargain, especially among the wealthy who had daily contact with Greeks, spoke Greek, and traded throughout the Greek world. If being more Greek meant being less isolated, that was a good thing. Couldn't there be a form of Judaism that kept its essence while giving up practices that were really remnants of another time? No. Not according to devout Jews and to the poor Jewish farmers who experienced the Greek world only through higher taxes, assessed to build new temples and supply new armies. Though the word is not precisely accurate, we can get a sense of who these Jews were by calling them fundamentalists. They were religious purists who were filled with a growing righteous anger. Becoming Greek was not becoming a little more modern, it was giving up your essence. Greek culture was a poison. The believers set out to purge their land of this offense to God or be destroyed in the attempt. These fervent Jews invented the practice of religious martyrdom, dying a public death to rebuke the hateful rulers and to inspire others to fight on. The Jewish focus on God and His commandments found its exact opposite in the Greek belief in reason and personal power. The two could not be more different. As late as the early 20th century, some of the most extreme and harsh racial theories were built around the idea that Jews and Greeks must be biologically distinct races. But 2,000 years before that, people in Israel had no idea of race. Instead, they assumed that the conflict between Greeks and Jews must be part of God's plan. As Greeks and Jews, moderates and extremists, battled, many thought they were seeing events predicted in the Bible taking place in front of them. Even as the fundamentalist Jews were fighting for control of Jerusalem, Greece itself was being conquered by Rome. Were not the fall of first Persia and then Greece exactly the events predicted to happen just before the Savior, the Son of Man, was to appear? According to Christians, just as this moment foreseen in Scripture, Jesus was born. As with Moses, we do not know anything specific about the historical Jesus, or even if he was anything like the man described in the New Testament. But if we follow those accounts, Jesus was a Jew who said that obeying the law of the Bible was not enough. He came to preach the law of love. The book of Matthew describes his message in two simple commandments, both of which are based on well-known Jewish laws and prayers. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. The essence of Christianity was humanity, love, and tolerance. Jesus had the courage to clash with those who seemed to be defiling religion and humanity to speak up for the poor, the deceased, and the outcast. Unlike the Jews who were focused on their own relationship to God, he aimed to bring hope to all human beings. The Greeks had spread their ideas and culture far and wide. Jews believed that they had a special pact with God. Christianity was the perfect merger of the two. Jesus offered a connection to God to anyone who believed in him and his truth. The Apostle Paul put it best: "There is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcision nor uncircumcision, barbarian, Scythian, bond nor free, but Christ is all, and in all." Paul is opening a big tent. Anyone who can join Jesus. But if Christ is all, what of those who reject him? They are nothing, or worse. They are the rejectors of the truth. They are evil. The saved are the saved, but the damned are the damned. Jesus was Jewish. His message was based on Jewish themes, and at first he and his followers thought Jews would see the light and join them. This great conversion never happened. Instead, Jesus was executed, and though it was a Roman official who ordered that he be nailed to a cross, a common means of execution at the time, some Jewish leaders were eager to get the troublemaker out of the way. As a new religion developed around the story of Jesus, its followers often followed the Greeks in seeing the Jews as stubborn, or even as the murderers of Jesus himself. Our deepest hatreds are often directed against others who are very similar to us, yet different in one particular way. If only that sole difference was a race, we feel everything would be fine. Precisely because Jesus was so Jewish, the fact that the Jews rejected him disturbed Christians. Precisely because Christians claimed to have a new truth that replaced Judaism, Jews withdrew from them. The foundations of an extremely deep-seated wall of hatred, bias, and prejudice were laid at the very birth of a faith that aimed to bring more love into the world. In fact, it was just in this period, as Christianity split off from Judaism, that the idea of Satan was invented. He does not exist in the Old Testament, but as Christians and Jews clash, they begin to see each other not just as human rivals, but as agents of an evil so absolute that it is the opposite of God. People who have given themselves to Satan are no longer human. The instinct of the earliest people to split the human from para now had the most powerful new justification. If an enemy is actually an agent of the devil, he deserves not just to die, but to be wiped off the face of this earth. The hostility between Christians and Jews carried the seed of the idea that groups of people could be absolutely and unchangeably different, not as Aristotle argued, because of where they were born, but because of their religion. The terrible consequences of the rivalry between Christians and Jews were not obvious at first. After all, both faiths were tiny, powerless groups within the mighty Roman army. The Romans were so different from the Jews and the Christians that stopping off in their empire may seem like a detour. Indeed, Rome did its best to stamp out Christianity. But ironically, it was the very links provided by the Roman roads and ships, the very security provided by Roman soldiers that made it possible for the new religion to spread. Without Rome, Europe might never have become Christian. Without a Christian Europe, the idea of race as we know it might never have been invented. To understand the world Christianity built, we next have to visit Rome. Rome, the tolerant empire. Walk through a school lunchroom and you see price tags. The brand name on every t-shirt, every pair of jeans, every cell phone, every set of sneakers, the cut of every hairstyle, and that's exactly how much money that student has to spend. Cars in the school lot are billboards blaring the same message. This is what my family and I are worth. But then there are other rankings on display. Popular kids, jocks, smart kids, cool kids, dating kids, lost kids, those about to graduate, those just getting to know the rules. Ancient Rome was a society built on similar graduations of class and power. Only in Rome they were written down as laws and enforced with brutal punishments. Rome illustrates how slavery can flourish without our sense of race. In Rome, prejudice was based on status. If you think back to the four pillars in the modern idea of race, Rome built its entire society entirely around ranking without the focus on inherited physical difference. This makes looking at Rome within the long history of race a kind of algebra experiment. It shows the different result you get when you shift around some of the terms of the equation. But even that is not the only reason to stop in at Rome. For it was the great Roman Empire that made Christian Europe possible, and it took the long centuries of European history to lead to the idea of race. Through its wars, Rome had managed to turn the great Mediterranean, the name means at the center of the world, into their own lake. Rome conquered the ancient kingdoms of Egypt, Greece, and Persia, and pressed on into Europe. In battle after battle, the well-trained and organized Romans defeated tribal peoples who still worshipped rocks and trees, who covered their bodies with tattoos, lived in mud huts, and hunted for food. As the Romans saw it, they were carrying the banner of superior civilizations through the land of barbarians. It was as if the armies of Gilgamesh were now ruling the lands of lived in mud huts and hunted for food. As the Romans saw it, they were carrying the banner of superior civilization through the lands of barbarians. It was as if the armies of Gilgamesh were now ruling the lands of Enkidu. Soon the whole savage world would be tamed. Rome's trade routes extended well beyond its borders, as it imported ivory from Africa, pepper from southern India, and silk from China. The internal city of Rome was the hub through which the people and products of Europe and Asia passed. Stone-paved Roman roads joined all of these far-flung garrisons of trade routes, knitting together the empire. These roads were the internet links of the day, connecting people, goods, and ideas in ways never before possible. Rome was like a great mother, whose arms were open to embracing anyone to the ends of the earth, so long as they knew their place in the family. Rome was more interested in expansion and power than in exclusion. It sought to conquer, not to purify. So much so that eventually even people who lived outside Rome were allowed to become citizens. This was extremely unusual and completely different from Greece, where your birthplace was your fate. A dark-skinned African, for example, could rise to become a powerful Roman general. People would notice his skill, not his skin color. Looking at Africans as they are depicted in Roman art is fascinating. A mosaic celebrates the marriage of a dark and light-skinned couple without any suggestion that this is unusual. A statue of an African emphasizes only his beauty. We are looking back in time to a period before the idea of race, seeing people without the distortion of later prejudice. But other kinds of distinctions and prejudice flourished, for Rome was obsessed with status and rank. Roman life centered on the family, which was organized around the father. He had the right to order the execution of any of his children, even when they were adults, and if anything they earned belonged to him. The father owed the same humble respect to the state as his family showed to him. In turn, slaves, the poor, freed slaves, and soldiers were to obey their owners, employers, former owners, or officers. Roman society was woven out of these clusters of duty and respect. Watch any film about the mafia, and you will hear a modern echo of the code of ancient Rome. Rome bought off the poor by offering them bread and circuses, just enough free filling food and lavish events at the Colosseum. This stadium, whose ruins are still a major tourist attraction in Rome, held 50,000 screaming people. It could be flooded to hold naval battles or kept dry for bloody death matches between gladiators. Watching these glory spectacles allowed people who lived difficult, marginal lives to feel they were special and superior to others. At least poor Romans had their freedom. Beneath them in the social ladder were hundreds of thousands of slaves. 1 out of every 3 people in the eternal city was held in bondage. The underside of Rome's great power was its ability to crush any individual and to brutalize great masses of people. Slavery was the ultimate expression of Roman rule, and Roman slavery had nothing to do with the curl of your hair or the color of your skin. A famous Roman satire describes a feast hosted by a former slave named Trimalchio, who has since become immensely rich. For exercise, the old, bald man stands in the gym, one slave beside him, ready to hand over the new ball each time he drops one, another to rush out with a silver chamber pot if he needs it. If he needs to dry his hands, a third slave bends over to offer his hair. When he leaves the gym, Trimalchio is carried in a scarlet litter, while a musician runs along by his side, playing a flute in his ear, as though whispering to him little secrets. Slaves made up the bottom layer of Roman society, and anyone of any ethnic background could be a slave. Your homeland, appearance, or religion had nothing to do with your status. In that sense, Roman slavery was as open as the Roman Empire. No one cared about what color you were or what god you worshipped, but everyone knew your precise social rank. Slaves might be prisoners of war, or they could be children abandoned by their parents, or even sold into bondage by desperate families. By one count, 20% of the children born in Rome were abandoned by parents who did not want a girl, or simply could not give another child a good life.